Good morning, everybody. Corey's Bloody History, or as I like to call it, Corey's Adventures Inside the Rubber Room with John F. Kennedy. So, God, have I been fucking busy. Holy shit. So I'm going down all the various rabbit holes. What is really I'm interested in, excuse me, what I'm really interested in is still, I'm sorting the military record. I'm kind of getting a grasp on things. Who was where, who witnessed who, that kind of thing. We have a couple guys like Powers. Was he Sergeant? Sergeant Powers. Daniel Patrick Powers, who was basically Oswald's superior when he went from Jacksonville to Biloxi. And then he saw him again overseas in the Philippines, in Subic Bay. So, but some of his statements are kind of contradictory, and when you dig into him, you won't find anything. Like, there's nothing official that you can find on him. But John Armstrong dug up that he was basically committed suicide in 1967. He was shot in the right temple, but the gun was found in his left hand. So that's a calling card. He was murdered. He knew too much, obviously. There's some suspicion that Oswald and the 5 people he was put with, Schrand and Powers and Baraton, I think his name was. There was 4 or 5. There was 6 of these guys total. One of them was Powers, who was a sergeant. There was some suspicion that all of these guys were basically kind of Oswald babysitters, but I don't know if I buy into that. 2 of the guys in this group got washed out of the Marines within the first year. For whatever reason, who the fuck knows. So that group of 6 became a group of 4. And then Martin Schrand got shot, so it became a group of 3. And then Powers got killed. And so then it became fucking Oswald and Baraton, I think his name was. And Baraton seemingly disappeared. So the whole fucking group got basically liquidated, it seems. I don't really know what happened to some of those guys. And finding information, especially if you can find anything on Daniel Patrick Powers, Sergeant, died in Maricopa County, Phoenix, Arizona, born in Minnesota. 1934, I believe. Then please hook me up. I got to find something on this guy, and I can't depend on the work of John Armstrong. I need to independently corroborate everything because John Armstrong got a lot wrong. So, in continuing on the theme of John Armstrong and his work, a book came out just in the last couple of years, like within the past 10 years, I think, called Mistaken Identity. And it is by a guy named... I should know this. Oh, where the fuck is it? Robert Duran, 2016 book called Mistaken Identity. Now, I can't find a copy of this book. All I can find are summaries. So, the theory that he puts forth is that the false Marguerite and the false Oswald are actually... cousins of Oswald's on the mother's side, and that the family is the Voitier family. The patriarch would be Paul Voitier, whose daughter, Aminth, allegedly had a son off the books that nobody knows about, named Leon Voitier. And this guy's suspicion is that this Leon Voitier is Harvey Oswald, right? The one that we know as Oswald who got arrested in Dallas. The problem is he doesn't offer any substantial evidence that there is a Leon Voitier at all, period. None, right? So just in going down this rabbit hole and digging into this, I come across the idea that the father of the family, the father of Aminth, who allegedly is the father of Leon Voitier, his name is Paul Polo Voitier. Paul August, quote-unquote, Polo was his nickname, Voitier. And sure enough, Oswald's uncle. Well, it's uncle once removed or whatever the fuck. I don't know. It's close enough, right? It's not even like 5 or 6, steps away. It's one. It's his sister, mother, and then on the mother's side, that's where you run into the Voitiers, right? And so it's very close relation. And as a matter of fact, when Marguerite Oswald's mother died, her little sister Mancy, her name is Aminth also, but they called her Mancy. She went to go live with the Voitiers. Who lived right up the road. So there's a close relationship between his Voitiers and the Claverie family. That's established. It's proven through the census records, 1920 and 1930, that Mancy was living with the Voitiers. And the author also speculates that at the exact same time, Marguerite Oswald, because she was young when her mother died, she was under 10, that she went to go live with the Voitiers also, but this isn't borne out in the records. When you look at the 1930 Louisiana census for John Marshall Claverie, who was Marguerite Oswald's father, the whole family's gone. The guy had like 5, 6 kids, and they're all gone, right? Who the fuck knows what happened to them? But he's living with, it's him and his wife, and that's it. And a couple older people, older relatives who were in their 50s, right? So there's no kids living in the fucking household in 1930 when John Marshall Claverie is like in his 50s. So what the fuck happened to Marguerite Oswald? Where'd she go live? She's not on the census records for the Voitier family, which is weird. So we don't know what happened to Marguerite once her mother died and where she went to live. This becomes a mystery that I just realized I need to figure out. So, but she, the speculation is that she lived with Paul Voitier. And, you know, I've studied this before. I can't believe I didn't put 2 and 2 together on this because Voitier was a minor character back then. But Voitier was one of Huey Long's bodyguards and obviously now a suspect in the murder of Huey Long, because at the end of the day, and I'm not going to get too much into, we're going to talk a lot about Huey Long, but I'm not going to get into like details of the speculation on the assassination and stuff like that. One day I'll get to it maybe, but Huey Long was killed by his bodyguards, period, who were on the take from the fucking mob, right? So who was it back then? It was before Marcello. It would have been, what the fuck was that guy's name? Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. This is at the very edge of my mafia research. Sam Carollo. Sam Carollo was the man down in fucking New Orleans at the time. So it's suspected that Voitier and 2 other guys who were the main guys surrounding Huey Long actually murdered him as they were shooting the alleged suspect, who was Dr. Carl Weiss. Now, I only know a little bit about Weiss, but ultimately there's a lot of contradicting information on what happened during the Huey Long shooting. Some witnesses said that Carl Weiss came up and punched him in the face, but the official story says that he pulled a gun on him. And I've seen other speculation or information, I should say, that said that they found the gun in Carl Weiss's car. Like he never brought the gun in with him. So it appears as though Weiss is a patsy. He was set up to do this, and then the bodyguards took out Weiss and Long at the same time. That's what it appears. So one of the main suspects in this whole incident is Oswald's fucking uncle. Who the fuck would have? Why have we never been told this ever? Why is it that in 60 years of Kennedy research, no one's ever made this fucking connection between the Kennedy assassination and the assassination of Huey Long via Lee Harvey Oswald and his family? Why is that? It's because Kennedy researchers are some of the most low IQ fucking people out there in the world. So, you should never listen to a goddamn thing they fucking say. They're excellent at digging up dots and digging up information that they have no fucking clue how to interpret. So, we're going to talk a little about Huey Long. We're going to give you a little bit of background, and we're going to show you how Mr. Paul Voitier, who's Oswald's uncle, is right up in the fucking mix of all this. And how, I'm still sitting here awestruck that no one's ever discussed this before. I mean, it's pretty goddamn important. Two of the biggest political assassinations in history are connected through one family. Or 2 families, I guess you could say. Or 3 if you want to include the Claveries. But it's wild. It's fucking wild. So the assassination of Huey Long, I'll give you the Wikipedia version, so we all know what to think of the Wikipedia version. On September 8th, 1935, Long left his 12th floor suite at the Roosevelt Hotel in New Orleans. While leaving, the hotel's owner, Seymour Weiss, asked Long where the deduct box was. Long replied, "I'll tell you later, Seymour." The deduct box was never found. Long traveled to the Louisiana state capitol in Baton Rouge in order to pass House Bill No. 1, redistricting plan, which would oust political opponent Judge Benjamin Henry Pavey. At 9:20 p.m., just after passage of the bill effectively removing Pavey, Long left the house followed by an entourage. As he proceeded down a corridor, Pavey's son-in-law, Carl Weiss, stepped out from behind a column and, according to the official version of events, fired a single shot with an FN Model 1910 semi-automatic pistol from 4 feet away. Long was struck in the torso, yelped, and ran down a hallway like a hit deer, one witness claimed. Long's bodyguards, nicknamed the Cossacks or Skull Crushers, responded by firing at Weiss with their own pistols, killing... Okay, so this summary is bullshit already. If you can't fucking tell, There's no evidence at all that fucking Huey Long was shot by a fucking bullet from Weiss, especially considering they found a fucking gun in his car, right? So Wikipedia can suck my fucking dick again. But I'll continue to read it just to wrap it up for completion's sake. Long was rushed to the hospital where an emergency surgery was held to close perforations in his intestines. Long's condition improved within several hours and he appeared to be recovering. However, by the next morning, it was realized that Long was hemorrhaging from his kidney. It was concluded that Long was too weak to survive from a second surgery. Long died at 4:10 a.m. on Tuesday, September 10th, 31 hours after being shot. According to different sources, his last words were, "I wonder what will happen to my poor university boys," or "God, don't let me die, I have so much to do." There's been controversy over whether Long could have survived with better surgical care. Biographer T. Harry Williams concluded that Long died as a result of medical incompetence. Alan Brinkley wrote that Long's doctors hopelessly bungled the operation. Yeah, put the blame on them, not the guys who fucking shot him, right? An autopsy was not conducted on Long or Weiss until Weiss's exhumation in 1991. So yeah, this is total bullshit. His bodyguards lit him up, and they were on the take, probably from Sam Carollo. So, but like I said, that's not my area of expertise. It's something I skimmed over briefly in my initial Kennedy research. So I found, just to give you some context on who Paul Voitier was in regards to Huey Long. Before he got with Huey Long and was working seemingly in the world of politics, he was a boxer. Him and his brother were boxers and kind of local heroes down in New Orleans. And so they were known to the community prior to when Paul Voitier got involved with Huey Long, which would be in the late 20s or early 30s. So let me read this article. It says, Long regime given verbal barrage by rival candidates. This is January 9th, 34. This is like a year before the assassination. Walmsley and Williams assail senator, former labor leader arrested. New Orleans, January 9th. Rival mayoralty political camps launched verbal attacks against Senator Huey P. Long at separate meetings here last night. Mayor T. Seamus Walmsley opening his campaign for re-election before a large crowd at Loyola University Gymnasium, said the one issue before the voters is the release of this city from the grip of an oppressive tyranny fixed upon it by the growing power of Huey P. Long. At another meeting, Francis Williams, independent candidate for mayor, said that if he were elected, he would not permit bodyguards for Senator Long to go around with guns in their pockets, intimidating men. A diversement at Walmsley's meeting was the arrest of Henry W. Hermes, former labor leader, as a heckler. James Dempsey, Central Trades and Labor Council president, made the statement that Walmsley had hustled off to headquarters, while a special detail of 25 police were thrown about the city hall entrances as special guards. As Barnes and his associates were held in headquarters cells, Jules Grasser, chairman of the Orleans Parish Democratic Committee, went before District Judge Walter L. Gleason at dawn and secured a decree ordering Barnes' removal from office and authorizing a civil sheriff to take charge of the registration books. Deputy Sheriff Lewis Knopp Jr. was designated as the officer in charge of the records. Shortly before C.S. Barnes and his associates were arrested, the New Orleans Tribune, published by Colonel James M. Thompson, came out with a front-page editorial demanding an honest election and suggested the jailing of any unqualified voters who might seek to cast ballots at the polls on Election Day. Let everybody cooperate for an honest election, each in his own way, said the editorial, and we shall have an honest election. But let none of them balk at the light that sterilizes political corruption. Clear the voting list first. Let those votes whose names have a right to stand on the registration rolls erase all other names, or throw those that claim them into prison cells when they appear as thieves at the polls. Then let the free citizens of New Orleans turn out on Election Day and see that the election is legally, honestly, decently conducted. The New Orleans States Today quoted police as saying that while the raid on the registration offices in the municipal building was going on, Senator Long and Robert Maestri, State Conservation Commissioner, drove by the city hall in a limousine. They took one look at the spectacle of the registrar of voters lined up against the wall with his aides awaiting the arrival of the patrol wagon and immediately drove off, the state said. It was immediately following the raid that Grasser drew up the supplementary writ asking the civil sheriff to be placed in charge of the registrar's office because the violation of Judge Gleason's restraining order. The papers were rushed to Judge Gleason's residence on St. Charles Avenue, and there the judge signed the petition placing the office in the hands of an impartial party, namely the civil sheriff, to secure and protect the entire registration rolls of the parish of Orleans until such time that as further orders of the courts are issued. The court writ was immediately turned over to Deputy Knopp, who in turn served it on Registrar Barnes at the police station. As Barnes took the paper in his hand, Paul Voitier, 33, reputed bodyguard of Senator Long, who had been arrested with Barnes, shouted to him not to accept the service of the writ. "He can't serve you with that thing in jail," Voitier shouted. Response to this advice, Barnes told Knopp he refused to accept service. "I don't care what you do with it now," Knopp replied. You were served with the writ when your hand touched it. You can burn it up now if you want. It doesn't make any difference to me." Knopp then immediately left the police station for City Hall, where he took charge of the registrar's office. He then swore in 24 city police on guard at the City Hall as special deputies to guard the registration records. A notice posted in the office said, "Please take notice that by virtue of writ of judicial sequestration issued in above-mentioned suit, Parish Democratic Committee versus C.S. Barnes, I have seized and taken in my possession the entire registration rolls of the Parish Orleans to be used in the primary election of January 23rd, a week from today." The notice was signed by Deputy Knopp. Registration office is raided by police. New Orleans, January 16th. Police early today raided the registration office in City Hall and arrested C.S. Barnes, registrar, and 10 others for allegedly violating a temporary restraining order prohibiting the scratching of voters' names and for tampering with the registration rolls. The men who police said were at work at 1 a.m. on the registration books were hustled to headquarters, while a special detail of 25 men were placed around City Hall as guard. The arrests were made by a squad under Chief of Detectives John J. Grosh, who said he acted on orders issued by City Attorney Nat W. Bond. The sensational action came on the eve of the mayoralty election on January 23rd, which has evolved into a bitter three-corner fight. Mayor T. Semmes Walmsley, head of the old regular political organization, is seeking re-election. John Clore is at the head of the Huey P. Long sponsored ticket, and Francis Williams, independent, is leading the third ticket. The arrests came soon after District Attorney Eugene Stanley, seeking re-election with the backing of both Walmsley and Williams factions, secured a court order for the examination of registration books from the 3 downtown precincts. Judge Frank T. Eschebal, in granting the order, directed Mr. Stanley to recuse himself because he was a candidate in the coming election. Stanley willingly complied. Police said that a representative of the city attorney had been stationed. Hang on a second, I got to scroll through this damn newspaper. Oh, of course, and it fucking cuts off and goes to another page. Oh, here we go. No, actually it doesn't, so I don't know where the fuck it went. But you get the point. Basically, in the 30s, if you thought we had fucking problems with our elections today and ballot stuffing, Jesus Christ, this motherfucker's like seized the whole registrar's office and replaced it and sworn in 24 new deputies to protect it. I mean, this is the fucking level of corruption in the country that we all live in today that created the world we live in, right? So, fuck. Goddamn, can you imagine like the absolute corruption of Texas and Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, all these fucking southern places, goddamn, back in the day? It's unbelievable, really. Really fucking unbelievable. So in this raid, let me get to the point. Paul Voitier is arrested in this raid, right? So he is most certainly one of, he's a shady henchman of Huey Long. And Huey Long is basically a fucking communist, right? So his assassination ultimately is probably a good thing. He was eventually going to seek the presidency and all this stuff, but he was a communist. I mean, he you don't have to call it communism for the day and age. He was just a liberal person back in the day, but especially comparatively to what everyone else was thinking, he was a fucking communist, right? So people don't understand like the absolute fucking insidious nature of cultural Marxism and communism and all this stuff. Like, that's why it's funny to me when you go through all the Oswald stuff and they're like, oh, he's a communist. Like, give me a fucking break. When you really come to understand what he was doing with communism, it totally not. It was an assignment, basically going back to the time he was a kid. So let's talk about the relationship here. Or do I have any other articles? Let me see. Yeah, actually, I do have another article in reference to the shooting of Huey Long. So let me cover this, and then we'll get back to The family relationships between Oswald and Mr. Paul Voitier, which are only, like I said, he's his uncle, and by not by by marriage, but it's on his mother's side, and the families were very intimate together. So, it's hilarious when I go through the census records and you see some of the names, like you go through like Find a Grave and some of the obituary stuff, and you start to see who the family members are. And then you go back through the census records from the 20s and 30s and 40s, and you'll see that these people were neighbors, right? And it turns out that, people like to fuck their neighbors. It's just how it goes. And like so many of these fucking relationships and families that grew out of this era and this time, and probably all over the fucking world, all sprung from people who lived next to each other, right? Your entire universe basically was the block you lived on, Witness before coroner's inquest tells of shooting. 2 questioned and hearing adjourned until 4 o'clock this afternoon. It picks up in the middle, so I'm just going to start here. The body was examined by the jury and the coroner, and it was found to have 30 bullet holes on the front and 29 in the back. 2 in the head, 1 penetrating the left eye and the other the tip of the nose. This is Carl Weiss we're talking about. It was impossible to tell which of the body wounds were entrances and which were exits. 2 bullets were recovered from the body, one a 45 and one a 38. So basically, if I didn't clarify, as Carl Weiss comes out, and I already said this contradicting information on whether or not he shot him or punched him or even had a gun in his hand, or if it was even found in the car. Nobody fucking really knows, because all we have is 50-year or almost 100-year-old speculation at this point. But basically, as soon as Weiss took his action, whatever he did, like 6 or 7 fucking bodyguards just started shooting. And it says here, what was there? 30 bullet holes on the front and 29 in the back. I mean, these guys emptied their fucking guns. Some of them are said to have even reloaded and continued shooting. So, it was in this hail of gunfire that Long was shot. He was not necessarily shot from Carl Weiss's gun, which we don't know if he had or not. Tells of talking to Long. Frampton, the first witness under questioning by the district attorney, said, immediately preceding the shooting, I talked with Senator Long and then went to the governor's office and telephoned my office in New Orleans in response to questions propounded by my office. I again called Senator Long at the sergeant at arms office in the house and talked with him. Then I left and was about to open the double doors leading into the corridor where the shooting occurred when I heard a shot. As I opened the door, I saw Senator Long walking down the corridor, clasping his aide. As I stepped through the door, I saw 2 men struggling, Murphy Roden and a man later identified as Carl A. Weiss. Then a half a dozen men began firing at Dr. Weiss. Testimony of witness. District Attorney Odom then drew the following testimony from the witness. Question. You hadn't come out in the hail when the first shot was fired? No. Then you didn't see the first shot fired? No. How much time elapsed between the first shot and the others? I would say 3 or 4 seconds. Was Dr. Weiss in plain view of you? Yes, he was. Did you see any overt act on the part of Roden? When I opened the door, he was struggling with Weiss and then backed away. Did he, Roden, wrest it away, or did Roden turn loose and back off? I couldn't say. Several shots fired. How many shots did Roden fire at Weiss? I couldn't say definitely, but several. Were Dr. Weiss and Roden both in a stooping posture during the struggle? Yes. How much time elapsed between the first shot and the time Dr. Weiss fell? I couldn't estimate it. It was practically continuous action. As Roden opened fire, Dr. Weiss fell? That's correct. Do you know any of the others who fired? I'm not sure. There were so many people there. Were any of the so-called Long bodyguards there? Half a dozen bodyguards. I recognize the half a dozen known to me as his bodyguards. Was Paul Voitier there? Yes, and I believe he had his gun out, and I think he was firing. Was Joe Bates there? I don't recall. Did anyone but Roden put his hand on Dr. Weiss? I don't think so. How much time elapsed between Roden's shot and the others? Almost immediately. It's a miracle to me that Roden wasn't shot by his own men. Were the other men who were firing behind Rhodes? Yes. Or Roden? Yes. Was Dr. Weiss on the floor when the others began shooting? Yes, he had slumped down with the gun in his hands. How did he fall? He fell face down in a marble corner of the corridor near the governor's office. Mr. Darmon, the second witness, said at the time of the shooting he was in the office of the secretary to the governor. The following testimony was given. Did you actually see the shooting? No. Did you see Senator Long? Yes. Senator Long came into the secretary's office and had said, we've got to get all our men here tomorrow. And then he walked back into the hall and I heard a shot from the inner office and I wasn't going to stick my head out the door. 30 or 40 shots fired. How many shots were fired? About 30 or 40 is my guess. How far did the body lay from the secretary's door? About 20 feet. Did you recognize anyone with Senator Long? Yes, Roden and Paul Voitier. At the conclusion of Darmon's testimony, District Attorney Odom, which is Bardwell Odom, which is fucking hilarious because he pops up in Kennedy, adjourned the inquest until 4 p.m. He later explained that the process was ordered in hopes of obtaining further witnesses. He declined to reveal who might be called. Members of the jury are Woodrow M. Knobloch, LSU student. That's kind of interesting. Marguerite Oswald was alleged to have been having an affair with a Mr. Knobloch, a VL Knobloch. Interesting. At least now I have a spelling to check. Jake Guslinski, unemployed Merle M. Welsh, embalmer, Thomas Davis, LSU student, and George C. Bryan, typewriter mechanic. Oh, I want to be a typewriter mechanic. Others attending the inquest included Sheriff Robert Pettit and attendants of the undertaking establishments and newspaper representatives. None of the bodyguards reported to have participated in the shooting were present at the inquest, nor were several other persons named as having been witness to the shooting. Then I have one specifically on Paul Voitier. Everybody spells his fucking name wrong. Even the guy in that book, Mistaken Identity, spelled his name wrong. New Orleans, January 19th, Paul Voitier, who acted as bodyguard for Huey Long, was arrested today in the criminal courts building on a charge of perjury in testimony in the investigation of the burglary of the registrar's office of voters. His bond was fixed at $3,000. God, that's a lot of money back then. And was signed by Abe Shushan, president of the Orleans Levy Board. District Attorney Stanley charged that Voitier had made false statements when he said he was regularly employed in the registrar's office and that he was in the office for the purpose of defacing and mutilating books. So, Paul Voitier pops up in this story of Huey Long, which is crazy because Huey Long is considered one of the precursor assassinations to the Kennedy assassination. All right, so let's go through the familial connection here so you guys have a solid understanding of who Voitier is in regards to Lee Harvey Oswald. So, let me see. I hope my page is open. So when you go to Find a Grave, and Find a Grave is a great place for dead people stuff, but there's a lot of there are a lot of misconnected links, right? People who had children whose children don't appear under their name, but then you can go find their children elsewhere and find they don't link back, right? So there's a lot of that stuff that goes on. And Jesus Christ, back in the fucking day, 100 years ago, every woman was named Margaret and every fucking man was named Edward or had one of those names in there somewhere. Oh, here's something, little tidbit I'll throw out for you. So I've been talking about Margaret Keating, who was Margaret Oswald, not Marguerite Oswald. However, I did find in some census records, I believe in 1930, that Margaret Emma Keating, who was Margaret Oswald, she actually on the census was fucking listed as Marguerite Keating. Weird, huh? Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Don't know. But it's interesting, right? Very interesting. So, John Marshall Claverie is like the matriarch or the patriarch of the Claverie family on Marguerite's side of things, right? So, John Marshall Claverie, husband of the late Dorothy Eve Dora Stuckey Claverie, who is listed as Mrs. John Claverie. And he was actually married to Dorothy Eva Stuckey and Amelia Margaret Stuckey. He married two Stuckeys, right? It seems to be a big thing back in the day to marry the sister of your dead wife. I don't know why. It just is. It's just one of those weird honor things. But what we have is his marriage to Dorothy Eva Dora Stuckey Claverie is the marriage that produced Marguerite Oswald. Jesus Christ, man, I'm losing my voice again. So they spit out a whole bunch of kids. There's a couple kids that I've come across that I can't determine if they are connected or not because the Ancestry.com information is kind of fucked and muddy. So there was a Bertha Claverie who is not on the list of Claveries anywhere, but yet I find her in Ancestry and I find her in newspapers.com and a couple other places, but I can't necessarily link her to these Claveries here. And then there's some conflicting information on Bertha Claverie in the first place. I saw one birth and death date that said she died at a year. I saw another one, she died at 9 years. But either way, because I've been looking for like a dead person that we could swap out, do a body swap with, right? An identity swap. Because that's obviously what was going on back in the day to some degree with this Oswald stuff. So you have... Okay, so John Marshall Claverie, born December 15th, 1869, died 19th of July, 1930. This is the father of Marguerite Oswald and her sister, Pearl. Pearl Claverie ends up ending... this is a little interesting side note. Pearl Claverie goes crazy and ends up in the East Jackson, Louisiana State Hospital. And she's there for 30 years. Okay, from like 1930 to 1963 when she died. She died middle of August, 1963, right? What happened reference to East Jackson, Louisiana State Hospital in 1963? Well, we've got the Clinton voter registration incident, right? All that stuff which surrounded getting a recommendation for allegedly, quote unquote, Oswald, aka Kerry Thornley, to get a job at East Jackson. He was trying to get into East Jackson for some reason, which I could never figure out. And that's where he got the Reeves Morgan. He wanted to get the recommendation from Reeves Morgan, so he goes to the barbershop and goes to see Reeves Morgan. He tells him you got to be a fucking constituent, so that's when he goes and tries to do the voter registration thing, right? That was all about getting into Jackson. Now, why the fuck would anyone want to get into Jackson Hospital in 1963, in October of 63? Why? Well, the only connection I can find is that Marguerite's sister was there and died there in August. That's the only connection I can seem to find in 1963 to Jackson that has anything to do with anything, which I suspect that might have actually been a reason for them going in there to see if Pearl like knew anything or what happened to her. Because you got to think, 1930-ish, she starts going crazy. If she had any contact with her sister and then this Oswald shit started getting pulled off, I could see her, being institutionalized. Or even if she was just going to blow the whistle on things. They used to lock people up just for things like that. Not even crazy. So who the fuck knows what her deal was? But she died there in August of 63, and then we have them trying to get in there by October of 63. So that's a little interesting. And then you have another sister, Amanthe Jean Claverie Winfrey. The Winfreys become another connected family here. But John Marshall Claverie, the father of Marguerite Oswald, had a sister named Marie Claverie Voitier. And Marie Claverie Voitier, come on, load. I swear to God, I hate this computer. Well, I have a brand new fucking Mini-Mac sitting right behind me that I'm just waiting for some USB cables to come in, and I'm good to go. So fuck this Windows PC piece of garbage. So when you go to Marie Claverie Voitier, and then you'll find that she was married to Paul Jean Voitier. She's married to Paul Jean Voitier, who will have a whole bunch of kids. In particular, Marshall Henry Voitier, born 1901 to 76, and Paul Auguste Polo Voitier Jr. This is the man we've been talking about, who's ultimately, I'll call him Oswald's uncle, even though he's like an uncle once removed or whatever the fuck. But him and his brother, Marshall Henry Voitier, were pretty famous local boxers down in Louisiana. But Paul Auguste Polo Voitier, he will at one point, after the death of Dora Stuckey, who is Dora Claverie, who's Marguerite's mother, Amanthe, who is nicknamed Mancy, will go and live with Paul Voitier and his wife, Lola Artigue Voitier. So they end up having a whole bunch of children. Armand Jean Voitier is one of them. And it's Armand Jean Voitier who, Mr. What the fuck is his name again? Duran, who wrote the Mistaken Identity book. He believes that it was her who was the false Marguerite. So I found a couple pictures of her as a child or as a teenager, I should say, because she was involved in school sports and they were really good. And so they were in the newspapers in the early 1900s down in New Orleans. And so it's been pretty interesting going down this journey. There's no evidence for any of the stuff that Duran is saying about Leon Voitier being like this, being the other Oswald. There's no evidence for that at all. But it doesn't change the fact I'm going to dig and I'm going to spend a lot of time making sure that I can vindicate that statement. Paul August Polo Voitier Jr., born 1900, died 1970, was one of the, when you get into like the conspiracy behind Huey Long, his name pops up all the time because him and a guy named Joe Messina also was involved with this. He was another bodyguard. And it was always assumed, and Messina went and opened a bar somewhere up in like New Jersey or something like that. But it was always assumed that these two guys were the primary guys behind the assassination of Long. And who on earth would have ever realized that this was Oswald's uncle? Because his mother was Marie Claverie Voitier, which means that she was from the Claverie family. She's the sister of the father, John Marshall Claverie. So it's pretty wild stuff here. But, I was going to keep going, but my voice is fucking going and it's really killing me. So I'm going to call it here for today. And in a couple hours, I'm going to try to do a bloody history of World War II. But just some interesting stuff I wanted to throw out there today. It's come up in my research. And that's about it. So I will be back on Monday. And we'll continue this conversation. Thanks, everybody.